Every payday, millions of American workers cash a check built on a number that was never supposed to exist.
$7.25 an hour. That is the federal minimum wage of the United States, the richest country in the history of the world.
But here is the part almost nobody knows, the part that changes how this whole story sounds. If the minimum wage had simply kept the promise it made on the day it was born, it would be roughly $23 an hour today.
Not 15, not 12. 23. That is not a fantasy number invented on the internet. It is a calculation from professional economists using government data. Therefore, the question is not whether the minimum wage is low. The question is how a number gets frozen for 17 straight years. And the answer involves a backroom deal, a powerful lobby most Americans have never heard of, and a handshake that quietly robbed millions of workers. This is the full story, and it ends with a receipt. To understand the lie, first understand the promise. In 1938, in the wreckage of the Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt signed the Fair Labor Standards Act. It created the first federal minimum wage in American history, set at 25 cents an hour. Roosevelt was crystal clear about what that number was supposed to mean. He said a minimum wage should be more than bare survival. It should be, quote, the wages of a decent living. Not a teenager's allowance, not pocket money, a floor that a person could actually stand on. And for 30 years, America kept that promise almost perfectly. From 1938 to 1968, the minimum wage rose in step with productivity growth, which is just a fancy way of saying something simple. When American workers produced more value per hour, the wage floor rose to match it. The economy grew, and the people at the very bottom grew with it. Congress kept doing its job, and lawmakers have approved 22 increases since that first 25-cent floor in 1938. By 1968, the minimum wage hit its all-time peak in real purchasing power. A full-time job at the bottom of the ladder could actually support a life. But then, something snapped. After 1968, productivity kept climbing like a rocket, decade after decade. American workers today are dramatically more productive than their grandparents ever were. Computers, automation, logistics, software, all of it made every hour of American labor worth more. Therefore, by the old rules, the wage floor should have climbed right alongside it. It did not. The minimum wage stopped tracking productivity. Then it stopped tracking inflation. And then it just stopped. So run the two calculations that Washington never wants to say out loud. Calculation number one is the productivity math. Economist Dean Baker at the Center for Economic and Policy Research crunched the numbers. If the minimum wage had kept pace with productivity growth the way it did for its first 30 years, it would be roughly $23 an hour. That is over $45,000 a year for a full-time worker at the very bottom. Nearly the median American salary, just for showing up and working 40 hours a week. That is the world the original promise was building toward. Calculation number two is the inflation math. And honestly, it is even more embarrassing. Forget productivity. Forget growth. Forget ambition entirely. If Congress had simply protected the value of the 2009 wage against inflation, the federal minimum would be about $10.60 today. They could not even manage that. Instead, inflation has quietly eroded 30% of the minimum wage's purchasing power over this 17-year freeze. Think about what that actually means for a real person. A worker earning the federal minimum in 2026 is functionally taking a pay cut every single year, without anyone announcing it. Same job, same hours, same $7.25. Less food in the cart. Today's federal wage floor sits at its lowest inflation-adjusted value in 7 decades, and it is now officially a poverty wage. A full-time, year-round job at $7.25 pays about $15,000 a year, before taxes. Try renting a one-bedroom apartment anywhere in America on that. Try covering a car repair, a dental bill, or a single week of childcare. Here is a comparison that makes it painfully real. In many American cities, a fast food combo meal now costs more than what the person behind the counter legally earns in an hour. The worker assembling the order cannot afford the order. That is not an economy, that is a punchline. Now, some people will say the freeze is just gridlock, just Washington being slow and dysfunctional. But that explanation falls apart the moment anyone looks at the timeline. The wage has been frozen since July 24th, 2009, the longest stretch without an increase since the minimum wage was created in 1938. Think about what 2009 America looked like. Instagram did not exist. Uber did not exist. The iPad had not been invented yet. Barack Obama had been president for 6 months, and Avatar had not even hit theaters. Since that day, America has cycled through multiple presidents, multiple Congresses, 2 recessions, a global pandemic, and one of the worst inflation spikes since the 1980s. And through all of it, the floor never moved 1 single cent. For comparison, the longest freeze before this one lasted 9 years, and the current freeze is nearly twice that long. Therefore, this is not an accident of gridlock. This is a result somebody paid for. So follow the money, because the money leaves footprints. Meet the most powerful lobby most Americans have never heard of, the National Restaurant Association. Labor advocates have a nickname for it. They call it the Other NRA. Restaurants employ a massive share of America's lowest paid workers. So every dollar the floor rises costs the industry billions. Therefore, for decades, this lobby has treated the minimum wage like an enemy to be contained. And in 1996, it pulled off one of the most consequential backroom deals in modern economic history. That year, President Clinton was pushing Congress hard to finally raise the minimum wage. The restaurant lobby saw it could not stop the raise entirely, so it did something smarter. Its leader at the time was a man named Herman Cain, the former pizza executive who would later run for president. Cain and the National Restaurant Association pressured lawmakers to carve tipped workers out of the increase, freezing their wage at $2.13. The deal was simple and brutal. The lobby would stop fighting the regular minimum wage increase as long as the tipped minimum wage stayed frozen forever. Congress shook hands on it. And that is why, right now, in 2026, the federal wage for tipped workers is still $2.13 an hour. 213, a number set in 1991, before most of the people reading it were born. The server bringing out plates on a Friday night is legally guaranteed less per hour than the cost of the soda on the tray. Yes, employers are technically required to make up the difference when tips fall short, but enforcement is so weak that an average employer has roughly a 0.001% chance of being investigated in a given year. 1 in 100,000. A worker is more likely to be struck by lightning than their boss is to be audited for wage theft. And the tipped wage deal was just one battle in a much longer war. Every time a serious federal raise gets close, the same machine roars to life. Trade associations flood Capitol Hill with lobbyists and warnings about job losses. Campaign donations flow to the exact committee members who decide whether wage bills live or die. In 2021, the Raise the Wage Act tried to push the floor to $15, and it died in the Senate. Multiple bills have been introduced since, including proposals for $15 and $17, and none has passed both chambers. The lobbying works. That is the whole point of lobbying. But here is the twist that should genuinely make every taxpayer angry, no matter their politics. When wages stay this low, the workers do not just quietly disappear. They survive by turning to food stamps, Medicaid, and housing assistance, programs funded by everyone's taxes. Therefore, the American public is effectively covering the payroll gap for some of the largest corporations on earth. A company pays poverty wages, the taxpayer fills the hole, and the savings flow straight into record profits. The minimum wage freeze is not free. The bill just got moved to a different mailbox. Now, to be fair, there is a real counter-argument, and it deserves an honest look. Critics warn that raising wages too high too fast could force small businesses to cut jobs. Economists genuinely debate where that danger zone begins, and serious people land in different places. But America has been running the experiment for years, and the results are on the board. 30 states plus Washington, D.C. have raised their own floors above $7.25, and their restaurants did not vanish. In 2026 alone, 88 jurisdictions across 22 states and 66 cities are raising their wage floors. Washington state now sits above $17 an hour, and people still eat out in Seattle every night. And here is the detail politicians should find terrifying. When minimum wage increases go directly to voters on state ballots, they pass with 60 to 75% support, even in deeply conservative states. Red states, blue states. It does not matter. When actual Americans get the vote, the raise wins in a landslide, almost every time. Therefore, the freeze does not reflect the will of the country, it defies it.
Which brings the story to the 20 states left behind. 20 states still effectively have $7.25 as their minimum wage. Places like Texas, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin.
Same country, same inflation, same grocery prices, half the floor.
A worker can cross a single state line and instantly become worth $10 more per hour. By law. Not because their skills changed, but because one legislature acted and the other one took the money and stalled. So step back and look at the whole picture one last time. The minimum wage was created as a promise, a floor that would rise as America rose. For 30 years, that promise was kept, and it built the strongest middle class the world had ever seen. Then the link to productivity was cut, the link to inflation was ignored, and the floor was left to rot. A worker's output kept growing, their legal wage floor kept shrinking, and the gap became somebody else's profit margin. The math says the floor should be around $23. The law says it is $7.25. The distance between those two numbers is not an accident, and it is not economics. It is the most expensive silence in America. Purchased one lobbyist, one donation, one handshake at a time. So the next time a politician calls $7.25 a starting wage, a stepping stone, a teenager's first job, remember the 1996 deal. Remember the frozen 213. Remember the 17 years of nothing, because the minimum wage was not forgotten. It was frozen on purpose by people who profit from the cold, and the receipt has a signature on it.